you think of when you think of Spain? If you're a fan of architecture, then you probably think of Gaudí, whose style, inspired by nature, is iconic in Barcelona. Just look at this cathedral, El Templo Expiatorio de la Sagrada Familia. That's a long name, but it also took a really long time to build. Work on this cathedral, the tallest religious building in the world, began in 1882, and they still haven't finished. It's taken more time to build than the pyramids, and it should be done by 2033. If you're a sports fan though, you probably think of something else. Camp Nou is home to perhaps one of the most popular football teams in the world, FC Barcelona. And in the last couple of decades, that popularity is thanks to one player whose name is known around the world, Messi. Today, he plays for Inter Miami in the US, but this is where Messi captivated the world's attention and admiration. It's gonna be hard not to make this video more about Messi. He's not even Spanish, but I'm gonna try. This stadium is the second largest in the world, and it was visited by millions last year, and it's currently being renovated to make room for more people. But it's not just been used for sporting events. Back in 1982, Pope John Paul II actually held Mass here for more than 120,000 people, which brings us to why we're here. When the Apostle Paul thought of Spain, he thought of his call to go where no one had gone before to preach the name of Jesus. And if you take a look around, you might think the mission was accomplished. But even though Christianity has been present in Spain for 2,000 years, Catholicism is rapidly declining. Less than a third of Catholics say they actually practice it. Many parishes are struggling to find priests to lead them. And today, people are 10 times more likely to step in a football stadium than in a church. But that's not necessarily the case for the Protestant church. Immigration and church planting movements are slowly changing the story, and some say that for the first time ever, Spain might be 2% evangelical. But is that enough? I want to know why some places like Spain that have been green for centuries start turning yellow, and is there any possibility that they could become red again? You might think of Spain as the most Catholic country in the world, but do people actually believe in it?
No creo en Dios. No creo en esa metafísica de Dios.
Me parece algo que se ha inventado la gente para lidiar con dificultades de la vida.
Creo en cosas espirituales, pero no tanto en religión como tal.
Hice la comunión y todo cuando era más pequeño, pero con el paso del tiempo he ido haciendo ya mi creencia y la verdad que no creo en Dios.
Soy muy material, no creo más en lo que veo y en lo que puedo como probar.
Yo sí que creo, pero no tan radical, ¿sabes? Un pensamiento un poco más liberal.
No creo en nada realmente así, como que haya un ente superior ni nada así. Tampoco es algo que yo crea que necesite.
The percentage of people in Spain that identify as non-religious has shifted from 9% to 22%. In major cities like Barcelona, less than 35% of people consider themselves religious. And to make matters worse, around 64% of Gen Z claim to be agnostic or atheist. At the same time, the Muslim population has increased significantly. Moroccan immigrants alone have grown to almost 1 million in the last 20 years. So how did it all come to this? Let's rewind. España, or the Kingdom of Spain, is one of the most famous, most visited, and most storied countries in the world. It's the land of Seneca and Trajan, Picasso and Dalí, Nadal and Fernando Alonso. But if you're familiar with the New Testament, you might know it as the furthest place Paul hoped to reach with the gospel. Many believe Paul did eventually make it to Spain, or as it was known then, Hispania, the province furthest to the east of the Roman Empire. But after the fall of Rome, Spain had to fight off other empires like the Byzantines and the Visigoths until they faced a new opponent like no other, the army of Muhammad. At the start of the 8th century, Arabic and Berber troops crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and conquered the Iberian Peninsula. For the next 8 centuries, most of the lands of Spain would be under Muslim rule. We're in Sevilla, one of the oldest cities in Spain, and its walls tell the story of foreign invaders. Even its name comes from the Arabic Ishbiliya, named by the Moors in 712. The bell tower of this cathedral, La Giralda, was actually originally a mosque, and it was built by the same dynasty that built the Qutubiyya Mosque in Marrakech, Morocco. This is all part of what makes Spain's history and culture so fascinating. Even though it's in Western Europe, its food, its architecture, and even language has an undeniable Arabic influence to it. You know, I've spoken Spanish my whole life, and it's kind of crazy to think how many Spanish words come from Arabic influence. Like, I've said ojalá my whole life. It just means like, let's hope or let's wish something happens. But literally, that means if Allah wills it, like if God permits it. And there's so many more words like that. Like, I think of azúcar, aceite, barrio, zanahoria. Like, these are all regular words in Spanish that have Arabic influence. And it's crazy to think that a language that I'm speaking thousands of miles away in Latin America was influenced directly by what happened right here centuries ago. So, how did Spain regain control of the Iberian Peninsula? Like in most cases, it took a war. La Reconquista holds the record for the longest war in history, and it was launched on the promise of regaining Christian land from the Muslims. Fernando and Isabella, officially recognized as the Catholic monarchs of Spain, made it their life's mission to unite the kingdom under their rule. At the turn of the 15th century, they launched a brutal inquisition that would kill anyone who wouldn't fall in line. Their first target were Jews and any leftover Muslims. Even those who would convert, conversos, would often be tortured and sentenced to death without trial. Allegiance to Catholicism was by force, and submission was absolute. When word reached Spain of Luther, the Reformer, and his 95 Theses, they quickly adapted the Inquisition to target any form of dissension, which resulted in more than 150,000 dead and made it almost impossible for Protestantism to grow here. The crown made sure that whatever else was happening in Europe, it wouldn't happen in Spain. As the Spanish journalist José Pérez said, Spain was the only European monarchy that had a national institution dedicated to eradicating heresy since 1478. And you might be thinking, well, that sounds like everything back then was really bad. Good thing we're not there anymore. And you'd be right, but ask any pastor in Spain today, and they'll tell you it's not all in the past. Just a generation ago, Generalissimo Francisco Franco persecuted more than 30,000 Spanish Protestants, forcing hundreds of pastors to leave the country. The regime branded itself as National Catholicism, and it was bad. Non-Catholic versions of the Bible were confiscated, Protestant schools were closed, pastors faced legal discrimination and were banned from public places of worship. This is Dr. Máximo Álvarez. He's a missiologist and theologian. He spent the last 2 decades investigating the state of the Protestant Church here in Spain.
El español en nuestra investigación doctoral me ha dicho que ellos no necesitan la conversión, que Dios no la pide. No se equivoque. Una cosa es el aprecio por la religiosidad popular y otra cosa es conocimiento de lo que significa la conversión a Cristo. Ellos dicen que habiendo sido bautizados de pequeño tienen todo lo que necesitan. No necesitan más. Que convertirse es entrar en una secta. La conversión es solamente para gente que está desorientada socialmente. Entonces, es una sociedad indiferente al cristianismo bíblico.
Today, on any given Sunday, if you go to one of the more than 700 Protestant churches here in Madrid, there will probably be more people in church than ever before. Just not the locals.
Algunos me dirán, oiga, pero nosotros estamos leyendo de muchas iglesias que en España tienen 100 y 200 y 500 personas. El 75% son personas latinoamericanas. No han ganado 500 españoles en 5 años y en 7 años. De que aquí se está creciendo con los inmigrantes, pero al español no se está llegando.
In 2000, Spain had less than 500,000 legally registered migrants. Today, that number is closer to 8 million. Around 15% of the current Spanish population is immigrant, and has completely transformed the nation. Many are coming from Morocco and Romania, and the differences in languages and customs means it'll take a generation or two before they integrate into the Spanish culture at large. but a significant influx of migrants are also coming from Colombia, Peru, Venezuela, and other places in Latin America. They speak Español, and they have a long connected history with Spain.
They're not just showing up for work though. They're showing up at church.
Spain has always been talked about as the graveyard of missionaries. And then early 2000s, we get this massive wave of migration from Latin America, and all of a sudden, the population of evangelicals has doubled.
This is Alberto Puente. He is the pastor in Sevilla and is working to see the gospel go deep, not just in Spain, but out from Spain to the rest of the world. The church in Spain is growing like never before. A recent census says Protestants are hovering around 2% of the total population. And that's amazing when you consider that in 1998, that number was about 0.2%.
In the early 1990s, very few people knew what an evangelical was. I became an evangelical Christian. It was, what is that? People had not heard of that. So the Latin American immigration has been super helpful, encouraging for churches here.
As encouraging as these statistics are, it's important to note that growth by migration numbers don't always mean conversions. A lot of Christians from Latin America are moving in and gathering as local churches, but there's a lot of work still to be done in their local communities, and that reflects a more pressing issue.
The greatest need right now in Spain is actually pioneering work in towns and villages of Spain that have never had any evangelical presence. All provincial capitals have evangelical churches. The hometown of my mother, there's 15,000 people, and there's never been an evangelical church in that town in its history.
Most of the new churches that are being planted or seeing this growth are in city centers like Barcelona, Sevilla, and Madrid. But if you venture into the heartland of the country, you'll be met by a population with minimal foreign influence and a lack of religious diversity. For those living in these smaller towns, the cathedral in the town square remains the sole religious landmark, and it's reported that 92% of these towns have little to no evangelical presence. To put it simply, for millions of Spaniards, there's absolutely no evangelical witness. Hope is not lost here. Even after facing intense persecution and an actual inquisition, the evangelical church is growing in Spain. And many believe that the best days for gospel ministry in Spain are just around the corner. The numbers may still be small, but we're talking more than decimal points now. And that makes me wonder what opportunities and challenges will come next. As I talk to pastors and leaders here, they all mention their concern for the secularization and general apathy towards religion in Spain.
We have a big enough church in Spain now that why not think about sending them? There are believers that are like, hey, I have this interest, this burden for, Moroccans, Algerians. I would love to see some of the guys we're training here go to this North African city and support the work there by pastoring the Latinos. And those Latinos in North Africa are doing evangelism at their work. They're bringing in Muslims to their churches.
If one thing in Scripture is clear, it's that the gospel is not meant to stay in one place for one people group or culture. It crosses borders and languages and traditions. And Spain has a unique opportunity to carry this mission out, starting with those right next door.
As I've traveled throughout the Arab world, there's one comment I've heard over and over again from the locals. We are not Arab. It can be tempting to lump people groups together, but the truth is, while having been conquered by the Arabs, these regions tell a deeper story. And nowhere is this more true than Morocco. For thousands of years, Morocco has been a crossroads for conquerors, traders, and immigrants. But when we turn the pages back, we'll find that it's also no stranger to Christianity. So, is there any hope for one of the most significant chokeholds for the gospel in northern Africa to find Jesus again?